This story was submitted by a 19-year-old college student from Ohio, and I want to be upfront. This one stayed with me longer than most. At the time, she was living alone in a cheap off-campus apartment in a small, quiet college town. The kind of place where nothing really happens, where you leave your car unlocked and think nothing of it. Her unit was on the ground floor, which she had actually preferred when she signed the lease. Easier access. No stairs after late nights in the library. The layout was simple. A front door that opened into a small living area, a narrow kitchen off to the right, and a single bedroom in the back. The bedroom window faced a narrow alley running along the side of the building. She had thin curtains over it, the cheap kind that let in more light than they block out. It was a Tuesday night in late October. She had just finished a long study session and settled into bed around 11:30. I was almost asleep when I heard it. A faint scratching sound, coming from just outside the bedroom window. Not loud, not aggressive, just this quiet, rhythmic scraping against the exterior wall or maybe the window frame itself. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was probably a stray cat moving through the alley, or maybe a branch brushing against the building. Except I already knew that explanation did not hold up. I had looked out that window dozens of times. The alley was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide and completely bare. No bushes, no trees, nothing that could scrape against anything in a light breeze. Still, I pulled the blanket up and closed my eyes. It was late. I was exhausted. And the easiest thing in the world is to convince yourself that nothing is wrong when you are too tired to deal with the alternative. The scratching stopped. I exhaled slowly and tried to settle back into sleep. Then the scratching stopped. For a moment, the silence felt like relief. I let out a slow breath and loosened my grip on the blanket. But that relief lasted maybe 5 seconds before I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel just outside my window. Not hurried, not passing through. Each step was careful, like whoever it was wanted to move quietly, but the gravel kept betraying them. I went completely still. I mean completely. I stopped shifting, stopped adjusting, barely let myself breathe. My heart was hammering so hard I was almost convinced it was audible outside. I kept my eyes fixed on the curtain. It was thin enough that any light source would cast a shadow right through it. And then one appeared. A silhouette, tall and slightly hunched, moved into frame and stopped. Directly outside my window. It did not keep walking. It did not move at all. It just stood there, completely still, facing inward. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and opened my messages. I texted my friend Maya, just 3 words. Someone outside window. I was too terrified to call, too afraid even the sound of my own whisper might carry through that thin glass. She responded immediately, asking if I was serious, telling me to call 911. But I couldn't move. I just kept watching that silhouette. It didn't move either. For nearly 10 minutes it just stood there, completely still. Not pacing, not leaning, just standing. Present. Waiting. And then it happened. A knock. Just one at first. Low, unhurried, almost gentle against the glass. Then 2 more, spaced deliberately apart. It wasn't the frantic knock of someone needing help. It was something far worse. It was slow and careful, almost experimental, like someone quietly checking whether anyone inside was still awake. With every ounce of composure I had left, I dialed 911 and pressed the phone against my ear, whispering my address as quietly as I could. My voice was shaking. I kept my eyes on that curtain the entire time. By the time officers arrived, maybe 6 or 7 minutes later, the silhouette was gone. The alley was empty. But what they found made everything worse. Fresh boot prints, pressed deep into the mud directly beneath my bedroom window. And when they examined the latch, they told me it had been tampered with from the outside. Not broken, just worked at, carefully, like someone testing how much effort it would take. I remember one officer asking if I had any idea who it could have been. I said no. But then it hit me. Something I could not shake. Whoever was standing outside that night had not tried any other window. They went straight to the bedroom. They already knew exactly where I slept. That first story still gets under my skin every time I think about it. But the next one comes from someone else entirely, and in some ways, it bothered me even more. This narrator is a woman who was in her early 30s at the time. 3 years ago, she agreed to house sit for her sister for about 2 weeks while her sister traveled out of the country. The property was in rural Minnesota, a modest single-story home set back from a county road, completely surrounded by dense tree line on 3 sides. She describes it as genuinely beautiful during the day. Quiet, peaceful, the kind of place people dream about escaping to. But at night, that isolation felt different. The nearest neighbor was roughly half a mile down the road. No streetlights, no ambient noise from traffic or people. By around 10 p.m. on the first night, she had settled in completely. Unpacked, fed the cat, poured herself some tea. She felt totally at ease. That part matters. Everything had been calm for the first hour or so. She was stretched out on the couch, some reality show playing in the background, not really watching it, just letting the noise fill the silence the way you do when a house feels a little too quiet. Then something moved. It was in her peripheral vision, just beyond the large living room window that faced the backyard. A shift in the darkness, quick and low. She turned her head, expecting to catch a deer stepping out from the tree line. That was the reasonable explanation. Deer wandered through that yard all the time. Her sister had mentioned it. But the yard was empty. She stared for a moment, then glanced toward the porch. The motion sensor light mounted above the back door was off. Whatever she had seen, or thought she had seen, had not been close enough or substantial enough to trigger it. She told herself it was nothing. But she did not look away from that window for a long time. She went to the kitchen around 11 just to grab a glass of water. Nothing felt wrong at that point. The house was quiet, the television still murmuring from the other room, and she was completely relaxed. Then she looked out the kitchen window toward the backyard. She stopped moving entirely. Standing just beyond the tree line at the far edge of the yard was a figure. Barely visible in the darkness, but unmistakably there. Tall, dressed in dark clothing, and completely, absolutely still. Not shifting weight, not looking around, just standing there facing the house directly. She told me she stood frozen at that window for what felt like a full minute before her brain even registered what she was seeing. Because the figure was not doing anything threatening. It was simply present, watching, patient in a way that felt far more deliberate than accidental. That stillness was the part that terrified her most. She killed every light in the house, moving fast and low, hoping the darkness would make her invisible. She pressed herself against the kitchen wall and watched the tree line for nearly 20 minutes. The figure never moved. Not once. It just stood there, patient and perfectly still, like it had nowhere else to be. She called her sister, voice barely above a whisper. Her sister paused, then offered a calm explanation. The neighbor sometimes walked the property at night. He was harmless, she said. Just an old habit of his. So she called the neighbor. He picked up on the second ring. He had been home all evening, he told her. Had not stepped outside once. His voice shifted as she described the figure. The reassurance drained right out of the conversation. He did not sound dismissive. He did not sound calm. He sounded genuinely alarmed. And that was the moment she understood that whatever was standing at the edge of that yard, it had no explanation she was going to like. By around 2 in the morning, the figure had simply disappeared back into the darkness. She never saw it move. It was just there. And then it was not. She did not sleep at all that night. She sat on the couch with every interior light blazing, back against the wall, watching that window until the sky finally started to go gray. In the morning, she went outside. There was a trail of footprints pressed clearly into the damp ground, leading from the tree line in a straight, unhurried line directly to the living room window. They stopped just inches from the glass. And at eye level, centered on the window, was a small smudge, the kind left when someone presses their face close to look through. She had been sitting right there, watching television, completely relaxed, completely unaware that on the other side of that glass, someone had been watching her the entire time. The third story comes from a guy who was 15 years old when it happened. He grew up in a suburban neighborhood outside of Chicago, Illinois, the kind of street where every house looks roughly the same and everyone knows their neighbors by name. His bedroom was in the basement, which he actually liked at the time. It felt private, separate from the rest of the house. But the one thing about that room he never quite got comfortable with was the window. It ran along the top of the wall, sitting just at ground level, facing the narrow side yard between his house and the wooden fence bordering the neighbor's property. On a clear day, you could see shoes walking past. On a Friday night in late October, his parents had left around 6 for a dinner party across town. He was home alone, no siblings, just him, his gaming setup, and a window that looked out at a strip of grass barely 4 feet wide. So there I was, maybe around 9 in the evening, completely zoned into whatever game I was playing. Headphones on, volume up, totally in my own world the way you are on a Friday night when you have the house to yourself and 0 responsibilities until morning. I do not even know what made me look up. There was no sound I could consciously hear, no real reason. It was just one of those instinctive things, like something in the back of your brain quietly taps you on the shoulder. The motion light in the side yard was on. I pulled off my headphones and sat still for a moment, just listening. The house was quiet. Nothing moved. No sound from outside, no footsteps, nothing. I figured it was a cat cutting through the yard. It happened all the time in that neighborhood. A minute or so passed and the light timed out. The side yard went completely dark again, and I put my headphones back on. 30 minutes pass, and then the motion light floods the side yard again. This time he does not assume anything. He pulls off his headphones and turns directly toward the window, and that is when he sees it. Just at ground level, framed by the bottom edge of the window, is the lower half of a person. Dark pants, slightly worn boots, standing completely still on the other side of the glass. Not shifting weight, not moving toward the fence, not walking anywhere, just standing there, directly in front of his window. He tells himself it could be a neighbor, someone cutting through the yard, someone who just happened to stop there for a completely normal reason. But no one stops like that. Not that still. Not that close to a basement window at 9:30 on a Friday night. The boots do not move. The light stays on. And he sits there, frozen, staring at the legs of a stranger who is clearly staring back. Every part of my body locked up completely. I could not move, could not blink, could not pull my eyes away from that window. My brain was screaming at me to do something, but my body simply refused to cooperate. It felt like every muscle had just switched off at once. After what felt like a full minute, I managed to slowly slide my hand across the mattress toward my phone. I kept my eyes fixed on the window the entire time. I opened my messages and typed something to my parents. Something like, "Someone outside my window, please call me." I hit send and waited. Nothing came back. Then the figure moved, just slightly, just a small shift in weight, but enough. And then I understood what was happening. The lower half of the silhouette was sinking downward, slowly, deliberately, knees bending, the figure crouching, bringing itself down toward window level, toward my eye level, toward me. The second that figure started crouching, something in my brain just snapped into action. I lunged across my desk and killed my monitor. The room dropped into complete darkness. I threw myself behind my bed and pressed my back flat against the wall, knees pulled to my chest, not breathing. And then I heard it. A slow drag. Fingers, I think, pulling across the glass. Not frantic, not testing. Just slow and deliberate, like someone tracing the edge of the window frame with no particular urgency. Like they had all the time in the world. I had my phone in my hand already. I opened the dial pad and called 911. When the operator answered, I pressed the phone against my ear and whispered my address. My voice was shaking so badly I had to repeat the street name twice. The dragging sound never stopped while I was on that call. Slow, patient, unhurried. Whatever was outside that window was in absolutely no rush at all. The police arrived within 8 minutes. He heard the cars pull up, saw the red and blue light washing across his ceiling, and only then allowed himself to breathe. They swept the side yard and found no one. Whoever had been standing outside that window was gone. But what they did find made everything worse in its own quiet way. The window screen had been partially lifted from the outside and carefully set aside against the fence. Not knocked off, not torn. Set aside, deliberately, like someone who had done this before and knew exactly how to do it without making noise. The detail that stayed with him longest came the following day. A neighbor across the street told officers she had seen a man standing in that side yard for nearly an hour before the police arrived. She had not called anyone. She had simply assumed he lived there. He had been standing outside that window for an hour. When his parents came home later that night, he told them everything. His mother went quiet. His father went pale. That was the part that stayed with him. Because his father then admitted that the week before, he had noticed someone standing at the far end of their driveway late at night. Just standing there. He had glanced out the front window, seen the shape, and assumed it was a neighbor out for an evening walk. He never mentioned it, never thought twice about it. But that detail changed everything. Because it meant whoever had been crouching outside that basement window had not shown up randomly on a Friday night. They had been there before. They had been watching the house, learning the layout, learning the routines. And somehow, they had known that a 15-year-old boy would be down in that basement bedroom, completely alone, with nowhere to go. That part, he said, never really stopped bothering him. 3 different people, 3 different states, 3 completely different homes. But when you set the stories side by side, something uncomfortable becomes very clear. In each case, whoever was outside was not acting on impulse. There was no frantic rattling of handles, no rushed movement, no sense of someone stumbling upon a house by chance. Every single one of them was still, quiet, waiting. That kind of patience is not accidental. It takes deliberate effort to stand motionless outside a stranger's window for 20 minutes, for an hour, watching the light change inside a room, learning the rhythms of a space before doing anything at all. These were not random encounters. The tampered latch, the face pressed against the glass, the screen carefully lifted and set aside. Each detail points to the same conclusion. Someone had already been watching. The night these people noticed was likely not the first night they had been observed. What makes these accounts difficult to shake is not just what happened, but how close each person came to letting it go. A scratching sound dismissed as a branch. A shadow assumed to be a deer. A motion light chalked up to a passing cat. These are reasonable explanations. Normal explanations. The kind most of us land on every single night without consequence. But each of these people had a moment where they almost rolled over and closed their eyes. Almost convinced themselves it was nothing. And the screen that had been quietly lifted from its frame, the boot prints pressed into the mud directly beneath a bedroom window, the smudge left by a face pressed against the glass while someone sat just feet away. None of that would have been discovered until much later, if at all. That is where the real weight settles. Not in the dramatic moments, but in the ordinary ones. The pause before you decide to look. The second where nothing has happened yet. Anyway, that is going to do it for tonight. If you made it this far, do me a favor before you go to sleep. Just check your window locks. Not because something is definitely out there, but because these 3 people all thought the same thing at some point during their nights, that it was probably nothing, that they were probably just tired, that there was probably a reasonable explanation. 2 of them had their windows tampered with. 1 had someone pressed against the glass while she sat 3 feet away watching television. So just check. It takes about 30 seconds and you will likely find everything exactly as you left it. Probably. The thing about that feeling, the one where you become suddenly, completely aware of a window in a room you have been comfortable in for years, is that once you have genuinely experienced it, it does not fully leave you. You just get better at pretending it has. Thanks for watching.